For 3 years, she had been his shadow, his secret, his shame. Lady Rosalind Ashford had given the Duke of Harrogate everything, her reputation, her virtue, her heart, only to be cast aside like a worn glove when he needed a pristine bride. But when the whispers became roars and society turned its back, an unexpected saviour emerged from the wings. Lord Adrian Blackwell, the enigmatic Earl of Thornfield, whose offer of his name would either be her salvation or her final ruin. What she didn't know was that accepting his proposal would unravel secrets far darker than her own. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has travelled. London, 1818, the season's height. Lady Rosalind Ashford stood before the tall windows of her modest townhouse in Bloomsbury, watching the carriages roll past toward Mayfair's grand ballrooms. Once she would have been among them, dressed in silk and jewels, her dance card filled before the evening began. Once she had been the daughter of a respected baronet, admired for her beauty and her accomplishments at the pianoforte. Once she had believed in love. That was before the Duke of Harrogate had looked at her across a crowded assembly room with eyes like winter frost, before he had whispered promises in darkened gardens, before she had become his most carefully guarded secret. The morning light cast long shadows across the drawing room's faded wallpaper. 3 years of stolen moments, clandestine meetings in rented rooms, of waiting for him to acknowledge what burned between them. 3 years of being the mistress no one could know about, while he maintained his pristine reputation among the ton. "Miss Rosalind, your tea," said Mrs. Pemberton, her elderly housekeeper, the only servant who had remained after the scandal broke. The woman's lined face held no judgment, only a weary compassion that sometimes felt harder to bear than contempt. "Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton." Rosalind's voice was soft, refined, despite everything. Her father had insisted on the finest education, the best masters. What good had it done her? She was now 24, unmarriageable. Her name whispered behind fans at every social gathering she no longer attended. The Duke, she could barely think his Christian name anymore, Sebastian, had promised her so many things. He had told her his marriage to Lady Catherine Beaumont was merely political, that his heart belonged to Rosalind alone. He had sworn that once his mother passed, once his sister was settled, once the estate matters were resolved, he would find a way to make her his duchess. She had believed him because she had wanted to, because at 19, fresh from her country home, with stars in her eyes, she had thought a duke's attention meant something beyond his own pleasure. The letter had arrived yesterday, delivered not by Sebastian's hand, but by his solicitor. Cold, formal language on expensive paper. "The Duke of Harrogate wishes to inform you that your arrangement is hereby terminated. The quarterly allowance will cease immediately. Please vacate the premises at 14 Grafton Street by month's end. Any attempt at communication will be met with legal action." Rosalind had read it 3 times before the words penetrated. 4 weeks ago, Sebastian had been in her bed, his hands in her hair, promising her that his feelings would never change. 2 weeks ago, the engagement announcement had appeared in the Morning Post. His Grace the Duke of Harrogate to wed Lady Catherine Beaumont, daughter of the Marquess of Ashford. Not even a personal word, not even the courtesy of a final meeting. The townhouse she occupied was rented in a false name, the allowance that had sustained her now cut off as cleanly as a surgeon's knife. Her father had disowned her when the affair became known 18 months ago, not through Sebastian's confession, but through the vindictive revelation of Lady Arabella Morrison, a woman who had sought the Duke's favour and found only rejection. The baronet had died 6 months later, his health destroyed by the shame his daughter had brought upon their family name. Rosalind's mother had passed when she was a child. She had no siblings, no relatives who would acknowledge her existence. She was utterly, completely alone. "The rent is due next week," Mrs. Pemberton said quietly, arranging the tea things. I've managed to put off the butcher, but he won't wait much longer." Rosalind closed her eyes. The small sum her father had left her in trust before her disgrace had nearly run dry. She had perhaps £50 remaining, enough for 2 months of rent in a much cheaper lodging with nothing left for food or fuel. What did women in her position do? She knew the answer, of course. They went further down the path she had already started. Mistresses who lost their protectors either found new ones or ended up in establishments that catered to men's baser needs. The thought made her stomach turn, but what choice did she have? She had no skills that could earn a living. No respectable household would employ a woman of ruined reputation, and she could hardly go into service. A knock at the door interrupted her dark thoughts. Mrs. Pemberton went to answer it, and Rosalind heard a woman's voice, cultured and firm. A moment later, her housekeeper returned with a calling card on a silver tray. "Lady Agatha Blackwell," Rosalind read aloud, confused. She knew the name, everyone did. Lady Agatha was the aunt of the Earl of Thornfield, a woman of independent means and rather scandalous reputation herself. She had never married, had lived abroad for decades, and was known for her outspoken views on women's education and rights. What could such a woman want with her? "Show her in," Rosalind said, smoothing her simple morning dress. It was one of the few she had left. The expensive gowns Sebastian had provided had been sent back with the solicitor's letter, as if even those garments were too good for a discarded mistress. Lady Agatha swept into the room like a force of nature. She was perhaps 60, tall and erect, with iron-grey hair and keen dark eyes that seemed to see everything. She wore a travelling dress of deep burgundy, far more practical than fashionable, and carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had long since stopped caring what society thought. "Lady Rosalind Ashford," she said, not waiting for introductions. "Or should I say Miss Ashford, since your father's title died with him?" "Simply Miss Ashford now, my lady," Rosalind replied, keeping her voice steady. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Lady Agatha sat without being invited, her sharp gaze taking in the shabby furnishings, the worn carpet, the general air of genteel poverty. "I'll be direct, as I always am. I've been watching your situation with interest. The Duke of Harrogate is a fool and a coward, but you already know that." Rosalind felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I don't know what you've heard, but please, child, don't insult my intelligence. All of London knows you were Harrogate's mistress. Most of them enjoyed the scandal immensely. I, however, found it tedious. A man using his position to seduce a young woman and then abandoning her when it becomes inconvenient is hardly original. The bluntness was shocking, but also strangely liberating. Rosalind had spent so long in the shadows, pretending, hiding. To have it spoken aloud, matter-of-factly, was almost a relief. "Why are you here?" Rosalind asked quietly. "Because you have a choice to make, and you need to make it with clear eyes," Lady Agatha replied. "You can continue down the path you're on. Destitution, perhaps another protector, if you're lucky enough to find one before you're truly desperate, and an inevitable decline into the sort of life no woman chooses freely. Or you can come with me to Thornfield House." Rosalind stared at her. "I don't understand. My nephew, the Earl of Thornfield, is in need of a wife. Before you assume the worst, let me be clear. He knows your history. He knows everything, and he's willing to offer you his name, his protection, and a chance to rebuild your life on your own terms." The room seemed to tilt. "Why would an earl marry a ruined woman?" Lady Agatha's smile was thin. "Because my nephew is a complicated man with his own reasons, which he will explain if you agree to meet him. But I can tell you this, he's offering you something genuine, a legal marriage with all the rights and respect that entails. Not another sordid arrangement, but a true chance at redemption." Rosalind's heart hammered against her ribs. It seemed impossible, too convenient, like something from one of the novels she used to read as a girl. What does he want in return? Your presence at his side, your cooperation in society, and your discretion. Adrian is not Harrogate. He won't use you and cast you aside, but he will expect you to fulfill the role of countess with dignity." Lady Agatha leaned forward. "I won't lie to you, child. It won't be easy. Society will sharpen their knives, but you'll face them as Lady Thornfield, not as a discarded mistress scrambling for scraps." Rosalind's hands trembled as she set down her teacup. A week ago, she'd been planning how to survive. Now she was being offered salvation by a complete stranger. Every instinct screamed that it was too good to be true, that there must be some terrible catch. But what choice did she have? Refuse and face certain ruin. Accept and at least have a chance, however small, at a different future. "When would he want to meet?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lady Agatha's smile widened. "This afternoon, if you're willing. He's waiting at Thornfield House. Pack what you value most. Mrs. Pemberton may come with you if she wishes. You won't be returning to this place." As Rosalind nodded, feeling as though she were stepping off a cliff into unknown waters, she couldn't help but wonder what sort of man would marry a woman of her reputation, and more frighteningly, what he would expect from her in return. Thornfield House stood in Mayfair, an elegant townhouse of honey-coloured stone with black iron railings and window boxes that spoke of quiet wealth rather than ostentatious display. As Lady Agatha's carriage pulled to a stop, Rosalind felt her stomach clench with anxiety. She had brought only a small trunk containing her few remaining possessions, some books, her mother's jewellery, a handful of dresses that had belonged to her before Sebastian. Mrs. Pemberton sat beside her, equally nervous. The elderly woman had insisted on coming, refusing to let her young mistress face this strange new situation alone. Rosalind was grateful for her presence, even if it meant another mouth to feed on uncertain charity. The butler who answered the door was elderly, but impeccably turned out, his expression professionally neutral as he took their modest luggage. The entrance hall was beautiful in its restraint, dark wood panelling, a staircase that curved upward like a swan's neck, and paintings that spoke of taste rather than mere expense. "The Earl is in his study," Lady Agatha announced, leading them through the house. "Mrs. Pemberton, Harris will show you to the housekeeper's parlour. Miss Ashford, come with me." Rosalind's heart hammered as they approached a closed door at the end of a corridor. Lady Agatha knocked once, then entered without waiting for a response. The study was lined with books from floor to ceiling, the afternoon light streaming through tall windows that overlooked a small private garden. A fire burned in the grate despite the season being spring, and the room smelled of leather and pipe tobacco. Behind a large desk sat a man who rose as they entered. Lord Adrian Blackwell, Earl of Thornfield, was not what Rosalind had expected. She had imagined someone older, perhaps dissipated, the sort of man who might seek a notorious bride for perverse reasons. Instead, she found herself looking at a man perhaps 30 years old, tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes the colour of stormy seas. His face was angular, intelligent, with the sort of features that would have been called handsome, if not for the harsh set of his mouth and the shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He wore a simple coat of dark blue superfine, his cravat tied with more practicality than fashion. There was something almost severe about him, as if he had long ago decided that softness was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Miss Ashford," he said, his voice deep and measured. "Thank you for coming." "My lord," Rosalind replied, curtsying with the automatic grace of her upbringing. "Your aunt explained your proposal. Sit, please." He gestured to the chairs arranged before the fire. Lady Agatha settled into one with familiar ease, leaving Rosalind and Adrian to take the others. "I imagine you have questions." Rosalind met his eyes directly. If this was to be a business arrangement, she would treat it as such. "Why would you offer marriage to a woman of ruined reputation? Surely there are dozens of respectable young ladies who would be honoured to become your countess." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Direct? Good. I prefer honesty to pretty pretences." He leaned back in his chair, his long fingers steepled before him. The truth is complex, but I'll attempt to simplify. I need a wife for practical reasons, to manage my household, to fulfill certain social obligations, and to provide stability to my position. I have no desire for a romantic entanglement, no interest in the emotional complications that typically accompany marriage. I see, Rosalind said slowly, and you believe a woman with a scandalous past will be more amenable to such an arrangement. I believe a woman who has already been through society's meat grinder will have fewer illusions about fairy tales and true love. Adrian replied bluntly. You know what it is to be used and discarded. You know the value of security and respect. You won't expect me to play the besotted husband, and I won't expect you to play the blushing bride. It should have hurt, that casual assessment of her character, but instead Rosalind found it oddly refreshing. At least he wasn't lying to her, wasn't promising love he couldn't deliver. And my past? You're willing to weather the scandal? The scandal will be intense but brief, Lady Agatha interjected. Society loves nothing more than a redemption story. The fallen woman rescued by a noble lord. They'll cluck their tongues and gossip, but within a season they'll move on to fresher meat. Adrian nodded. My position is secure enough to withstand the initial shock. I'm not well liked, but I'm respected. My fortune is substantial, my estate prosperous, my bloodline impeccable. Marrying you will raise eyebrows, but it won't destroy me. How reassuring, Rosalind murmured, unable to keep the edge from her voice. His eyes sharpened. I'm not offering you romance, Miss Ashford. I'm offering you survival with dignity. As my countess, you'll have a home, an allowance, and the protection of my name. You'll manage my household, serve as my hostess, and present yourself in society as Lady Thornfield. In return, I ask for your cooperation and your discretion. Whatever happens within our marriage stays within our marriage. And children? Rosalind asked, forcing herself to address the practical realities. You'll want an heir. Something flickered in his expression, gone too quickly to identify. Eventually, yes, but there's no urgency. We can address that matter once we're both comfortable with the arrangement. Rosalind studied him, trying to understand what drove this strange proposal. There was something haunted about Lord Adrian Blackwell, something that suggested his demons were as real as her own. What had happened to make him so cold, so determined to avoid emotional connection? What if I refuse? She asked quietly. Then Lady Agatha will ensure you have enough funds to establish yourself somewhere quietly, perhaps in Bath or Brighton. You won't starve, Miss Ashford, but neither will you have the protection that marriage would provide. It was generously spoken, but Rosalind understood the reality. Charity from Lady Agatha would be finite. Eventually, she would still face the same limited options, the same slow slide into degradation. This offer, strange as it was, represented something more permanent. May I have time to consider? She asked. You may have until tomorrow morning, Adrian replied. I won't rush you into a decision, but neither can I wait indefinitely. If you agree, I intend to obtain a special license and marry within the week. The longer we delay, the more speculation will build. Rosalind nodded, her mind whirling. It was madness to even consider it, marrying a stranger, binding herself legally to a man she knew nothing about beyond this one cold conversation. But it was equally mad to refuse when she had no other prospects, no other hope. There's something else you should know, Lady Agatha said, her voice gentle for the first time. Tomorrow night, the Duke of Harrogate will announce his engagement to Lady Catherine at the Pemberton Ball. It's the event of the season. Every member of the ton will be there. Rosalind felt ice form in her chest. Sebastian and his pristine bride celebrated and congratulated while Rosalind hid in shame. The thought made her sick. If you accept Adrian's proposal and we move quickly, Lady Agatha continued, you could attend that ball as the betrothed of the Earl of Thornfield. You could face Harrogate not as his discarded mistress, but as a woman who has moved forward to a better future. The temptation was almost overwhelming. To face Sebastian with her head high, to show him that he hadn't destroyed her, that she had found her own path to respectability. But the risk was equally enormous. The ton could be vicious. They might tear her apart simply for the entertainment value. "I need to think," Rosalind said, standing. "If you'll excuse me." Lady Agatha showed her to a guest room on the second floor, beautifully appointed with rose-coloured silk wallpaper and furniture of polished mahogany. A maid had already unpacked her small trunk, hanging her few dresses in a wardrobe that could have held 50 more. Alone, Rosalind sank onto the edge of the four-poster bed and let herself feel the weight of her situation. 3 years ago, she had been a naive girl who believed in love and happy endings. Then she had become a duke's secret shame, living in the shadows of his respectable life. Now she was being offered a chance at a different kind of future, not one of passion or romance, but one of security and dignity. Was that enough? Could she marry without love, bind herself to a cold stranger who wanted nothing more than a convenient arrangement? But then, hadn't she already proven that love was a fool's dream? Sebastian had claimed to love her, and it had meant nothing when his ambitions required a different bride. At least Lord Adrian was honest about his lack of feeling. There would be no false promises, no waiting for affection that would never come. She thought of her father, dead of shame because his daughter had trusted the wrong man. She thought of her mother, who had once told her that a woman's reputation was her only true currency in society. Both would turn in their graves at the idea of her marrying under such circumstances. But they were dead, and she was alive, and survival required compromise. By morning, Rosalind had made her decision. She found Lord Adrian in the breakfast room, reading the newspaper over coffee. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "I accept your proposal," Rosalind said without preamble. "I'll marry you, Lord Adrian, and I'll fulfill every duty expected of your countess. But I have one condition." He set down his paper. "Name it." "Respect. You've made it clear this will be a practical arrangement, and I accept that. But I won't be treated as another piece of furniture to be used and ignored. If I'm to be Lady Thornfield, then I expect to be consulted on household matters, to have a voice in decisions that affect our shared life. I've spent 3 years being invisible. I won't do it again." For the first time since they'd met, Adrian Blackwell smiled, a real smile that transformed his severe features into something almost warm. "Agreed, Miss Ashford. I have no desire for a silent, decorative wife. Your intelligence and strength are precisely why my aunt suggested you." He stood and extended his hand. Rosalind took it, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers, the unexpected steadiness of his grip. "Then we have an understanding," she said. "We do. I'll obtain the license today. We'll marry in 3 days, quietly, with only my aunt and your Mrs. Pemberton as witnesses. And then Lady Rosalind Blackwell, Countess of Thornfield, will attend the Pemberton ball and show society that you've risen from the ashes." Rosalind's heart hammered with fear and anticipation. In 3 days, everything would change. She would become someone new, someone who could face her past with armor, forged from necessity and determination. She only hoped it would be enough. The wedding took place on a Thursday morning at St. George's, Hanover Square, the fashionable church where most of society married. Adrian had insisted on it, despite Rosalind's suggestion of something more private. "We're not hiding," he had said firmly. "This marriage is legal and legitimate. We'll conduct it properly." Rosalind wore a dress of ivory silk that Lady Agatha had commissioned from her own modiste, simple but elegant, with long sleeves and a high neckline that spoke of respectability rather than seduction. Her dark blonde hair was arranged in a classical style, woven with pearls that had belonged to Adrian's mother. She looked, she thought with some surprise, as she studied her reflection, like a proper bride. Mrs. Pemberton wept as Rosalind descended the stairs of Thornfield House. "You look beautiful, my dear," the elderly woman said, dabbing at her eyes. "Your mother would be so proud." Would she? Rosalind wondered. Or would she be horrified that her daughter was marrying without love, entering into a calculated arrangement born of desperation? There was no way to know, and no point in dwelling on it. The decision was made. The ceremony itself was brief and formal. Adrian spoke his vows in a steady voice, sliding a gold ring onto her finger, with hands that didn't tremble. When it was her turn, Rosalind heard herself promise to love, honor, and obey, the words feeling both foreign and irrevocable. The vicar pronounced them man and wife, and Adrian kissed her cheek with the perfunctory courtesy of a business transaction concluded. They signed the register, Adrian's bold signature next to her careful script, and suddenly she was Lady Rosalind Blackwell, Countess of Thornfield. She had a new name, a new identity, a new life. The wedding breakfast was held at Thornfield House, attended only by Lady Agatha, Mrs. Pemberton, and Adrian's steward, Mr. Wickham. It was oddly anticlimactic, this reshaping of her entire existence. They ate cake and drank champagne, and Adrian gave her a set of keys to the house and a bank draft for her personal allowance that made her eyes widen. "For your clothing and personal expenses," he explained. "The household accounts are separate. Speak with Mrs. Morrison, the housekeeper. She'll guide you through the management details." It was more money than Rosalind had seen in years, presented as casually as if it were nothing. She folded the draft carefully and tucked it into her reticule, still struggling to believe this was real. That afternoon, Adrian retreated to his study to handle business matters, leaving Rosalind to explore her new home with Lady Agatha as her guide. Thornfield House was larger than she'd realized, 5 stories, including the servants' quarters, with over 20 rooms. There was a music room with a beautiful pianoforte that made her fingers itch to play, a library that rivaled some gentlemen's clubs, and a conservatory filled with exotic plants. Adrian's mother was a botanist, Lady Agatha explained as they walked among the greenery. She travelled extensively before her marriage, collecting specimens from India and Egypt. After she died, Adrian maintained her collection. I think it comforts him to care for living things she loved. It was the first personal detail Rosalind had learned about her new husband, and it softened something in her perception of him. When did she pass? 10 years ago, when Adrian was 20. His father had died 3 years prior, so he inherited young. It's made him serious beyond his years. Lady Agatha touched a delicate orchid bloom. He was different before, you know. Warmer, more open. But grief changes people. Rosalind thought of her own losses. Her mother so long ago, she barely remembered her face. Her father, who had died hating what she'd become. What changed him, beyond his mother's death? Lady Agatha's expression shuttered. That's his story to tell, not mine. But know this, Rosalind. Adrian is a good man, even if he's built walls around his heart. He'll honor his promises to you. You can trust him in ways you couldn't trust Harrogate. The mention of the Duke sent a chill through her. Tomorrow night, she would see Sebastian again at the Pemberton ball. The thought terrified and energized her in equal measure. That evening, Adrian requested her presence in the drawing room after dinner. Rosalind found him standing by the fireplace, still formal in his evening dress, holding a velvet box. "These belong to my mother," he said, opening it to reveal a stunning parure. Necklace, earrings, and bracelet of sapphires set in gold. "They're traditionally worn by the Countess of Thornfield. I'd like you to wear them tomorrow night." Rosalind stared at the jewels, their deep blue fire catching the lamplight. They were worth a fortune, and he was entrusting them to her as if she truly belonged in this family. "They're beautiful," she whispered. Adrian fastened the necklace around her throat, his fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. "You should know what to expect tomorrow. The Pemberton's ball will be crowded. Everyone who matters in society will attend. When we arrive, there will be shock. People will whisper, stare, judge. Some will cut you directly." "I understand," Rosalind said, though her stomach knotted with anxiety. "But you won't be alone," Adrian continued, stepping back to look at her. "You'll be my countess, and I stand by what's mine. Anyone who insults you insults me, and they know it. The initial shock will be intense, but we'll weather it together." It was the first time he'd used the word together, as if they were truly a unit rather than two separate entities bound by contract. Rosalind found herself oddly moved by it. "The Duke will be there," she said quietly, "with his fiancée." "I know." Adrian's expression hardened. "Harrogate is a pompous fool who mistook his title for substance. You're better off without him, though I imagine that's cold comfort." "It's strange," Rosalind admitted. 3 months ago, I thought my heart would break when he abandoned me. Now I feel nothing, as if that girl who loved him was someone else entirely." "Perhaps she was," Adrian said. "We're all different people from who we were, shaped by what we've endured. The question is whether we let our experiences destroy us or forge us into something stronger." Rosalind met his eyes, seeing something in them she hadn't noticed before, understanding, born of his own suffering. They were strangers, married by necessity, but perhaps they weren't as different as she'd thought. "I won't let them destroy me," she said firmly. "Not again." Adrian's expression softened fractionally. "Good. Then we'll face them together, Lady Thornfield, and show them exactly what you're made of." That night, Rosalind lay in her new bedroom, a suite of rooms connected to Adrian's by a shared sitting room, the door between them tactfully closed, and tried to quiet her racing thoughts. Tomorrow would be the true test. Tomorrow she would walk into the lion's den, wearing sapphires and the name of a countess, and discover whether society would accept her transformation or tear her apart for daring to rise above her shame. She thought of Sebastian, imagined his face when he saw her on Adrian's arm. Would he feel regret, anger, or nothing at all, as she now felt for him? It didn't matter, she told herself. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about her, about claiming a future that belonged to her alone. Rosalind fell asleep with her hand on the sapphire necklace resting on her nightstand, a talisman against the unknown. Whatever came tomorrow, she would face it as Lady Thornfield, and she would not bow her head in shame again. Morning brought a flurry of activity. Lady Agatha arrived early, bringing her own lady's maid to help Rosalind prepare. The woman, a talented Frenchwoman named Lisette, worked magic with Rosalind's hair, arranging it in an elaborate style that showcased her elegant neck and the sapphire earrings. The gown Lady Agatha had commissioned was a masterpiece, deep midnight blue silk that complemented the jewels, cut in the height of fashion with a modest neckline, but a silhouette that emphasized Rosalind's figure without impropriety. "You look magnificent," Lady Agatha pronounced when Lisette finally stepped back. "Like a queen rather than a supplicant. Remember that tonight. You're not asking for their forgiveness or approval. You're simply existing in a space you have every right to occupy." Adrian appeared at the door of her dressing room, stopping short when he saw her. For a moment something flickered in his eyes, appreciation, perhaps even admiration, before his usual controlled expression returned. "You're ready," he said. Not a question, but an observation. "I am," Rosalind replied, surprised to find it was true. She was terrified, yes, but also determined. She had survived Sebastian's betrayal, her father's rejection, and the whispers of an entire social class. She could survive one more night. Adrian offered his arm. "Then let's show London what the Countess of Thornfield looks like." As their carriage rolled toward the Pemberton mansion in Berkeley Square, Rosalind watched the streets of Mayfair pass by, lit with gas lamps and crowded with other carriages full of people attending the season's most anticipated event. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her hands cold despite her gloves. Adrian's hand covered hers, warm and steady. "Breathe," he said quietly. "You're not alone in this." She met his eyes and saw something there that gave her courage, not affection perhaps, but solidarity. They were two people who had chosen each other not for love, but for survival, and there was a strange strength in that honest alliance. The Pemberton mansion blazed with light, music spilling from the open windows into the spring night. As their carriage joined the queue, Rosalind could see other guests arriving, the women in their finest gowns, the men in black evening dress. Somewhere in that crowd was Sebastian, the man who had promised her everything and given her nothing, and somewhere was the life she might have had if things had been different. But that life was gone, and this one, strange and uncertain as it was, belonged to her now. "Ready?" Adrian asked as their carriage reached the entrance. Rosalind straightened her spine, lifted her chin and felt the weight of the sapphires at her throat like armor. "Ready." They stepped out together into the light, and Rosalind Blackwell, Countess of Thornfield, prepared to face her past and claim her future. The moment they entered the Pemberton ballroom, Rosalind felt every eye turn toward them. The sudden lull in conversation was like a wave pulling back before a storm, and then the whispers began, a sibilant rushing sound that filled the glittering space like wind through dry leaves. "That's her, Harrogate's former. How dare she, with the Earl of Thornfield, married, surely not." Adrian's hand at her elbow was steady, his expression one of aristocratic disdain for anyone who might dare comment. Lady Agatha appeared at Rosalind's other side, a human fortress in burgundy silk. Together, they formed a phalanx that moved through the shocked crowd like a ship cutting through rough waters. Lord Pemberton, their host, was a portly gentleman with kind eyes who had known Adrian since childhood. He greeted them with careful courtesy, his gaze flickering between Rosalind and Adrian with questions he was too polite to voice. "Thornfield, delighted to see you. And this must be your bride. We were so surprised to hear of your marriage. Congratulations are in order." "Thank you, Pemberton," Adrian replied smoothly. "May I present my wife, Lady Rosalind Blackwell, Countess of Thornfield." "My dear, Lord Pemberton is an old school friend." Rosalind curtsied with perfect grace. "Lord Pemberton, thank you for receiving us." His eyes widened slightly. Whether at her poise or her audacity in appearing at all, she couldn't tell. Of course, please enjoy the evening." As they moved into the ballroom proper, Rosalind became acutely aware of the gauntlet they faced. Some guests turned away pointedly, refusing to acknowledge her presence. Others stared with undisguised curiosity or contempt, but a few, a surprising few, nodded in greeting, clearly taking their cue from Adrian's unshakable demeanor. "Lady Thornfield!" A warm voice cut through the tension, and Rosalind turned to see Lady Margaret Fairfax, an acquaintance from before her disgrace. The young woman was heavily pregnant and glowing with health, her husband, the scholarly Viscount Fairfax, at her side. "Lady Margaret," Rosalind said, surprised and grateful. "How wonderful to see you. I heard of your marriage to Lord Adrian. How splendid." Lady Margaret's smile was genuine, her eyes kind. "You must call on me soon. I'm desperate for conversation that doesn't revolve around nursery matters." It was a lifeline, this simple kindness, and Rosalind grasped it gratefully. "I would be delighted." As they talked, Rosalind saw Adrian exchange meaningful glances with Viscount Fairfax. The men clearly knew each other, and Fairfax's acceptance of the situation gave others permission to follow suit. It was a subtle shift, but Rosalind felt it, the atmosphere becoming fractionally less hostile. Then the crowd parted, and she saw him. Sebastian, Duke of Harrogate, stood near the center of the ballroom, resplendent in black evening dress with the emerald pin she had once given him tucked into his cravat. He was still handsome in that cold, classical way, fair hair, ice-blue eyes, features that belonged on a Roman statue. On his arm was Lady Catherine Beaumont, a porcelain beauty with blonde ringlets and an expression of serene superiority. Their eyes met across the room, and Rosalind saw the shock register on Sebastian's face. His pale complexion went even whiter, his jaw tightening with what might have been anger or disbelief. Lady Catherine followed his gaze, her perfect features hardening as she recognized Rosalind. "Steady," Adrian murmured, his hand tightening fractionally on her arm. "You're doing beautifully." Rosalind forced herself to breathe, to maintain her composure. She would not give Sebastian the satisfaction of seeing her falter. Instead, she smiled at something Lady Margaret was saying, laughed softly, and let the conversation carry her forward as if the Duke of Harrogate and his pristine fiancée were merely part of the scenery. But Sebastian was not content to let the moment pass. He approached them with Lady Catherine gliding beside him, his expression a mask of polite inquiry that didn't quite hide the fury in his eyes. "Thornfield," he said, nodding curtly to Adrian. "I heard you'd married. Rather suddenly, wasn't it?" "Harrogate." Adrian's voice was cool, his posture radiating controlled power. "Congratulations on your own engagement. Lady Catherine, a pleasure." Lady Catherine inclined her head with frosty grace, her gaze sweeping over Rosalind with thinly veiled contempt. "Lord Adrian, and this must be your bride. How unexpected." The word dripped with innuendo, and Rosalind felt heat rise to her cheeks. But before she could respond, Adrian spoke. "Indeed. I've always believed in taking advantage of opportunities others are too foolish to recognize. My wife is a woman of remarkable intelligence and grace, qualities I value far more than the sort of bloodless propriety some mistake for virtue." The insult was subtle but unmistakable, and Lady Catherine's eyes narrowed dangerously. Sebastian's jaw clenched, his hand tightening visibly on his fiancée's arm. "How fortunate for you both," Sebastian said, his voice tight. "Though I must say, Thornfield, I'm surprised you'd choose to ally yourself with such complicated circumstances." "Are you?" Adrian's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I find it more surprising that some men are so lacking in perception they discard treasures, only to realize their value when someone else claims them. But then, that's always been your failing, hasn't it, Harrogate? You collect pretty things but haven't the sense to appreciate their worth." The tension was thick enough to cut, and Rosalind saw several nearby guests pause their conversations to listen. Sebastian's face had gone from pale to flushed, his aristocratic composure cracking. "You presume too much, Thornfield," he said coldly. "On the contrary, I presume exactly enough." Adrian's voice was soft, but carried an edge of steel. "Now, if you'll excuse us, my wife promised me a dance." He swept Rosalind onto the dance floor before Sebastian could respond, the waltz beginning at precisely the right moment. Rosalind's hands trembled as Adrian positioned them in the proper form, one of his hands at her waist, the other holding hers with surprising gentleness. "That was incredibly reckless," she breathed as they began to move. "Perhaps, but necessary." Adrian guided her through the steps with practiced ease. "Harrogate needed to understand that you're under my protection now, and I won't tolerate any attempt to demean you." Rosalind looked up at him, this cold stranger who had defended her honor more fiercely than the man who had claimed to love her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I didn't expect that I would stand by my promises." Adrian's expression softened fractionally. "I told you, Lady Rosalind, I take my commitment seriously. You're my countess, and that means something." As they danced, Rosalind became aware that others were watching them, not with the cruel curiosity of before, but with something more complex. She saw calculation in some faces, reassessment in others. Adrian was not just any earl. He was wealthy, powerful, and clearly willing to wage social warfare for his wife. That changed the equation significantly. When the dance ended, Adrian led her to the refreshment room where Lady Agatha waited with 2 glasses of champagne. "Well done, both of you," the older woman said approvingly. "Half the room is now reconsidering their initial judgments, and the other half is too intimidated by Adrian's defense to say anything cutting. The tide is turning." "Is it always this much work to simply exist?" Rosalind asked wearily, accepting the champagne. "When you're reshaping society's perceptions, yes," Lady Agatha replied, "but it gets easier. Each appearance, each interaction, builds on the last. By the end of the season, you'll be accepted, perhaps not by everyone, but by enough that it won't matter." The evening wore on, a strange mix of triumph and exhaustion. More people approached them now, curiosity overcoming their initial scandalized reaction. Some were genuinely kind, like Lady Margaret. Others were clearly seeking gossip. But with Adrian at her side and Lady Agatha running interference, Rosalind navigated the social minefield with increasing confidence. She saw Sebastian watching her throughout the night, his expression unreadable, Lady Catherine had attached herself to his arm like a beautiful barnacle, clearly marking her territory. Once their eyes met again, and Rosalind felt nothing. No pain, no longing, not even anger. Just a faint sense of wonder that she had ever believed herself in love with someone so fundamentally shallow. Near midnight, as they prepared to leave, a distinguished gentleman with silver hair approached them. Sir Edmund Hartley was a noted scholar and patron of the arts, his opinion carrying significant weight in intellectual circles. "Lord Adrian, I wanted to congratulate you on your marriage," he said warmly. "I had the pleasure of hearing Lady Rosalind play the pianoforte some years ago. She's remarkably talented. I do hope you'll both attend my wife's musicale next month. We'd be honoured to have you perform, my lady." Rosalind blinked in surprise. An invitation to perform at a prestigious musicale was no small thing. It represented not just social acceptance, but actual respect for her abilities. "We would be delighted, Sir Edmund," Adrian answered for them both. "My wife's talents should be shared, not hidden away." As they rode home in the carriage, Rosalind felt the tension that had sustained her all evening finally drain away. She was exhausted, her face aching from maintaining a pleasant expression, her feet sore from standing in fashionable slippers. "You were magnificent," Adrian said quietly, surprising her. "I've seen soldiers show less courage in battle than you displayed tonight." Rosalind laughed shakily. "I felt terrified the entire time." "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." He regarded her thoughtfully in the dim light of the carriage lamps. "You've been tested by fire, Lady Rosalind, and you've proven yourself forged steel. I'm proud to call you my Countess." The words warmed something in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. This strange marriage of convenience was evolving into something unexpected. Not love, perhaps, but partnership, mutual respect, a foundation on which something more substantial might eventually be built. As Thornfield House came into view, Rosalind allowed herself a moment of hope. Tonight had been a battle, but she had won. And tomorrow, the real work of rebuilding her life would begin. The morning papers were a revelation. Over breakfast, Adrian read aloud selected passages, his expression caught between amusement and exasperation. "The Morning Post. The Earl of Thornfield's surprise marriage to the former Miss Ashford has set tongues wagging throughout the ton. The new Countess, wearing the famous Thornfield sapphires, conducted herself with remarkable poise at the Pemberton ball, suggesting that perhaps there is more to this story than scandal alone." "That's relatively generous." "And the others?" Rosalind asked, buttering her toast with hands that were steadier than she expected. "The Chronicle is less kind, but stops short of actual cruelty. The Herald," Adrian frowned, "questions my judgment, but acknowledges our marriage is legal and legitimate. Overall, we've survived the first public appearance with our reputations reasonably intact." Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Each social event they attended created ripples, some positive, others less so. But gradually, measurably, the tone shifted. Rosalind's musical performance at Lady Hartley's salon was met with genuine acclaim, her talent undeniable even to those who wished to dislike her. Her work with Lady Agatha on a charitable project for women in difficult circumstances won unexpected allies among the more reform-minded members of society. Most importantly, Adrian's unwavering support created a protective barrier. He never left her side at social events, never allowed anyone to slight her without consequence. When Lady Arabella Morrison, the woman who had exposed Rosalind's affair, attempted to cut her at a garden party, Adrian had calmly and publicly noted that Lady Arabella's own reputation for malicious gossip made her opinions rather suspect. The woman had fled in tears, and no one else attempted such direct rudeness again, but it was a private moment, a month after the Pemberton ball, that truly marked the shift in their relationship. Rosalind had been in the music room, practicing a particularly difficult Beethoven sonata, when Adrian entered unannounced. She stopped playing, expecting him to make whatever request had brought him seeking her out, but instead He simply settled into one of the comfortable chairs by the window. "Don't stop," he said. "I've been working on estate papers all morning. Your playing is a pleasant change." Hesitantly, Rosalind returned to the piece, her fingers finding the keys with renewed purpose. The music filled the room, passionate, complex, demanding her full attention. When she finished, silence hung in the air for a long moment before Adrian spoke. "My mother used to play that piece," he said quietly. "She said it reminded her that life contained both sorrow and joy, often in the same moment." Rosalind turned on the bench to face him. "Lady Agatha said I might ask you about your mother, about what changed you." Adrian's expression closed off instantly, the walls slamming back into place. "Did she?" "She also said it was your story to tell," Rosalind added quickly. "I'm not demanding anything, Adrian, but we've been married a month, and I still feel as though I'm living with a stranger." He was silent so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, he began to speak. "I was engaged once, to Miss Elizabeth Worthing, daughter of Baron Worthing. It was arranged by our families, but we genuinely cared for each other. She was gentle, kind, everything a proper English rose should be." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "2 weeks before our wedding, she died. Typhoid fever, sudden and brutal. I watched her waste away over 4 days, unable to do anything but hold her hand while she burned with fever." Rosalind felt her chest tighten with sympathetic pain. "I'm so sorry. After Elizabeth died, I couldn't—" He stopped, visibly struggling. "I couldn't bear the thought of marrying someone else I might come to care for, someone else I could lose. The pain of it was too much. So I decided I wouldn't. I would fulfill my duties as the Earl, manage my estate, serve in Parliament, but I wouldn't allow myself to feel that kind of vulnerability again." "So, you married me," Rosalind said, understanding dawning, "because you knew it would be practical, businesslike, because you thought there would be no risk of actual emotion." Adrian met her eyes, and she saw something raw in his expression. "Yes and no. I married you because Lady Agatha convinced me that you needed saving and I needed a wife. But I also married you because—" He hesitated, then continued with obvious difficulty, "because you had already been hurt, because I thought you would understand what it was to build walls around your heart, because perhaps together we could create something that was enough, even if it wasn't everything." Rosalind rose from the bench and crossed to his chair, kneeling beside it so their eyes were level. "And is it enough, I mean?" Adrian's hand reached out tentatively, brushing a strand of hair from her face with unexpected gentleness. "I find myself caring whether you're happy, whether you feel safe in this house. I look forward to breakfast conversations and your music in the evenings. I feel satisfaction when I see you gaining confidence, reclaiming the parts of yourself that Harrogate tried to destroy." He paused. "That frightens me, Rosalind. It's more than I intended to feel." Her heart stuttered at the admission, at the vulnerability in his voice. "I'm frightened too," he confessed. "I swore I would never trust a man again, never allow myself to depend on someone who could hurt me. But you've been nothing but honorable. You've defended me, respected me, given me a life I never thought possible. And I find myself wanting—" She broke off, unsure how to articulate the longing she'd been denying. "Wanting what?" Adrian's voice was barely above a whisper. "More," Rosalind admitted. "More than a practical arrangement, more than mutual respect. I want to know you, Adrian, the real you, beneath all these careful walls." His thumb traced along her cheekbone, his eyes searching hers. "That's a dangerous want, perhaps. But I think we've both learned that living without risk isn't really living at all." The kiss, when it came, was tentative, a question rather than a demand. His lips were gentle against hers, seeking rather than taking. Rosalind felt herself respond, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, where his heart beat rapid beneath her palm. This was nothing like Sebastian's kisses, which had always been about possession and heat. This was different, careful, respectful, but with an undercurrent of genuine desire that made her blood warm. When they parted, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "We're making this more complicated," he murmured. "Good," Rosalind replied. "I'm tired of simple arrangements that mean nothing." A knock at the door interrupted them, and they sprang apart like guilty children. Lady Agatha entered, her sharp eyes taking in their flushed faces and the charged atmosphere with obvious satisfaction. "The Duke of Harrogate has requested an audience," she announced without preamble. "He's waiting in the blue drawing room. I thought you should both know before deciding whether to receive him." Rosalind felt her stomach clench. Sebastian, here, in her new home. What could he possibly want? Adrian's expression hardened instantly, all the softness of moments before vanishing behind his aristocratic mask. Did he say why? "He claims it's a matter of honor that requires private discussion with Lady Rosalind." Lady Agatha's tone made clear what she thought of that. "I told him he could wait while I consulted you." Rosalind stood, smoothing her skirts. "I'll see him. But only if you're present, Adrian. I won't be alone with him again." Adrian nodded curtly. "Of course. Let's see what Harrogate wants." The Duke stood by the window of the blue drawing room, his posture rigid. He turned as they entered, and Rosalind was struck by how haggard he looked. The polished aristocrat from the Pemberton ball had vanished, replaced by someone almost haggard, with shadows under his eyes and tension in every line of his body. "Lady Rosalind," he said, then caught himself. "Lady Thornfield, thank you for seeing me." "You have 5 minutes, Harrogate," Adrian said coldly. "Say what you came to say." Sebastian's gaze flickered to Adrian, then back to Rosalind. "I owe you an apology. More than an apology. I owe you acknowledgement of the grievous wrong I did you." Rosalind felt her eyebrows rise in shock. This was the last thing she had expected. What prompted this sudden attack of conscience? Seeing you at the Pemberton ball, seeing how you'd risen above what I did to you. Sebastian's voice cracked slightly. "And then my mother informed me that if I married Lady Catherine, she would disinherit me. She knew about us, Rosalind. She's always known. And she told me that a man without honor to protect those under his care was no son of hers. So you're here because your mother forced you," Adrian observed dryly. "How touching." "No!" Sebastian's composure shattered. "I'm here because she was right. I was a coward and a fool. I told myself I was doing what was necessary for the dukedom, that you would understand, that it was just an arrangement. But it wasn't. You loved me, and I used that love, and then I discarded you like you meant nothing." Rosalind felt old pain flicker through her, the ghost of heartbreak she'd thought completely healed. But it was distant now, muted by time and the new life she'd built. "Yes, you did all those things, and I'm asking for your forgiveness," Sebastian said desperately. "I've broken my engagement to Lady Catherine. My mother is adamant that I make this right somehow, though I don't know how I possibly can." "You can't," Rosalind said simply. "The past can't be undone, Sebastian. I'm not the girl who loved you anymore. She died when you sent that solicitor's letter. But I'll tell you what I can do. I can forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine, because I won't carry that anger and hurt any longer." Sebastian's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Could you ever?" "No," Rosalind interrupted firmly. "I'm Lady Thornfield now. My husband is a man of actual honor, who keeps his promises and treats me with respect. What we had, Sebastian, was never real. It was a fantasy, a mistake we both made. Let it go. She's being far more generous than you deserve," Adrian added, his voice like ice. "If it were up to me, I'd throw you out of my house and forbid you to speak my wife's name again. But Rosalind has a forgiving heart, which is more than you ever deserved to receive." Sebastian nodded slowly, defeat written in every line of his posture. "Thank you, Lady Rosalind. I hope that someday you can think of me without pain." "I already can," Rosalind replied. "That's the gift my new life has given me, the ability to let go of what never truly mattered." After Sebastian left, escorted out by a disapproving Lady Agatha, Adrian pulled Rosalind into his arms. She went willingly, resting her head against his chest and feeling his heart beat steady beneath her ear. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I am," she said, surprised to find it completely true. "It's strange, a few months ago seeing him would have broken my heart. Now I feel nothing but pity. He's trapped in his title and his family's expectations, exactly as I was trapped in his secret. But I'm free now, Adrian, truly free." His arms tightened around her. "And so am I," he murmured. "We're both free to choose what comes next." Rosalind looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability he was finally allowing her to witness. "Then let's choose each other, not out of necessity or convenience, but because we want to." Adrian smiled, a real smile that lit his entire face. "I think I'd like that very much, Lady Thornfield." As they stood in the blue drawing room, where Sebastian had offered his hollow apologies, Rosalind felt the final chains of her past fall away. She was no longer the Duke's discarded mistress or the shamed daughter of a baronet. She was Lady Rosalind Blackwell, Countess of Thornfield, and her future was her own to shape. 8 months had passed since the Pemberton ball, and London was in the grip of a new scandal entirely. Some young viscount had run off with his guardian's wife, and society had fresh meat to devour. The Duke of Harrogate had quietly married a respectable, if unexciting, baron's daughter, and was reportedly living a subdued life in Oxfordshire. Lady Catherine Beaumont had found consolation in the arms of a wealthy merchant's son, causing her father apoplexy, but making her apparently quite happy. And Rosalind, she was seated in the conservatory at Thornfield Manor, the Earl's country estate in Sussex, writing letters on a beautiful autumn afternoon, while sunlight streamed through the glass walls and painted everything gold. The estate was magnificent, 300 acres of rolling hills, ancient forests and productive farmland. The house itself was Elizabethan, all warm stone and mullioned windows, with gardens that Adrian's mother had designed and which Rosalind had taken joy in maintaining. Here, away from London's scrutiny, she had found a peace she hadn't known was possible. "The tenants are pleased with the new cottage repairs," Adrian said, entering the conservatory with mud on his boots and satisfaction in his expression. He'd been inspecting the work all morning. His commitment to his estate and the people who depended on it, one of the things Rosalind had come to deeply admire. "Weatherby says they'll be completed by winter." "That's wonderful," Rosalind replied, setting aside her correspondence. "I received a letter from Lady Margaret today. She's safely delivered a daughter and invited us to visit when we return to London for the season." Adrian settled into the chair beside hers, reaching for her hand with the casual intimacy that had developed between them. The marriage of convenience had evolved, slowly but undeniably, into something real. They had learned each other's habits and preferences, shared midnight conversations and morning silences, built a partnership that felt increasingly like love, even if neither had quite spoken the word. "And how are you feeling?" Adrian asked, his eyes dropping to where her other hand rested on her still flat abdomen. Rosalind smiled. "Well, the physician says everything is progressing normally." They had discovered her condition a month ago, and the joy in Adrian's face had been worth every moment of morning sickness. An heir, a child who would be born into love rather than duty, who would grow up seeing his parents as partners rather than strangers bound by obligation. "I never thought I'd have this," Adrian said softly. "After Elizabeth died, I was certain I'd live my life alone, performing my duties, but never truly connecting with anyone. And then you stumbled into my life, all wounded pride and hidden strength, and everything changed." "I stumbled," Rosalind teased gently. "As I recall, your aunt rather forcibly recruited me, for which I'm eternally grateful." Adrian raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with tender ceremony. "You've made this house a home, Rosalind. You've made me remember what it feels like to hope for the future rather than just endure it." "We've done it together," Rosalind corrected. "You gave me the space to heal, the respect to grow, and the safety to risk my heart again. I love you, Adrian Blackwell. I think I have for months, but I was afraid to say it." His expression transformed, the careful control he usually maintained dissolving into pure emotion. "I love you too," I fought it, told myself it was just respect or companionship or convenience, but I've been lying to myself. I love you, and I don't want to hide from that anymore. They kissed in the golden light of the conservatory, surrounded by his mother's beloved plants and the promise of their growing future. When they parted, Rosalind rested her head on his shoulder and looked out at the garden stretching toward the autumn woods. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if Lady Agatha hadn't intervened?" she asked. "If I'd refused your proposal and taken the money to start over somewhere anonymous?" "Sometimes," Adrian admitted. "And I'm grateful every day that you took the risk, that you trusted me enough to say yes." "It didn't feel like trust at the time," Rosalind confessed. "It felt like desperation and a gamble, but it was the best decision I ever made." A knock interrupted them. Harris, the butler, carrying a silver tray with an envelope. "This just arrived by special messenger, my lady, from London." Rosalind took the letter, recognizing Lady Agatha's bold handwriting. She opened it quickly, reading the contents with growing surprise and delight. "What is it?" Adrian asked, noting her expression. "Your aunt has been appointed to a royal commission on women's rights and education. She's been asked to recommend women of talent and intellect to serve on various committees." Rosalind looked up, her eyes bright. "She's recommending me for the Committee on Music Education in Schools for Girls." "Adrian, this is extraordinary." He smiled, pride evident in his face. "You've earned it. Your work with the music school in the village, your performances in London, people have noticed your abilities. This is just the beginning." It was more than Rosalind had ever imagined possible during those dark days after Sebastian's betrayal. Not just survival, not just respectability, but purpose. A chance to use her talents to help other young women develop their own. A voice in shaping society's future, however small. "I keep expecting to wake up and find this is all a dream," she admitted. "That I'm still in that shabby townhouse in Bloomsbury, alone and afraid." "It's real," Adrian assured her. "All of it. The love, the respect, the future we're building. You've earned every bit of it through your courage and grace." That evening, they hosted dinner for the local gentry, the vicar and his wife, the neighbouring squire, and several other families who had warmly welcomed the new countess. The conversation flowed easily, touching on parish matters, harvest yields, and plans for the winter assembly. Rosalind presided over the table with natural authority, making sure everyone felt included, directing servants with subtle signals, embodying every inch the countess she had become. After the guests departed, she and Adrian walked through the gardens in the moonlight, wrapped in wool shawls against the autumn chill. "I saw Lady Morrison in London last week," Adrian mentioned casually. "She stopped me in my club to offer congratulations on the child." Lady Arabella Morrison, the woman who had exposed Rosalind's affair, who had tried to humiliate her at the garden party. "That must have been awkward," Rosalind said. "Actually, she was quite sincere. Apparently she's fallen on hard times herself, some scandal with a married colonel. She said watching you rebuild your life with dignity had given her hope for her own situation." Adrian glanced at Rosalind. "You've become something of an inspiration, you know. The woman who rose from the ashes." Rosalind considered this, remembering the bitter, ashamed girl she'd been such a short time ago. "I don't feel like an inspiration. I feel like someone who got lucky, who had people willing to give her a second chance." "Luck had very little to do with it," Adrian countered. "You had courage. You could have refused my proposal or accepted it and remained bitter and closed. Instead, you chose to build something new. That took strength." They paused by the ornamental pond, watching moonlight shimmer on the water's surface. Rosalind thought about her journey, from beloved daughter to secret mistress, to discarded shame, to respected countess. Each transformation had cost something, but each had also taught her about her own resilience. "Do you ever wonder what Sebastian's life is like now?" Adrian asked. "Sometimes," Rosalind admitted. "I hope he's found some measure of peace. I don't hate him anymore. I'm actually grateful in a strange way. If he hadn't broken my heart, I never would have found you." "That's a very generous perspective," Adrian observed. Perhaps. Or perhaps I've just learned that holding on to anger only hurts the person carrying it. Sebastian was weak and selfish, but he wasn't evil. He was simply a man more concerned with appearance than substance, with title than integrity. She turned to face Adrian fully. You taught me the difference between someone who makes promises and someone who keeps them, between someone who hides his affection and someone who's brave enough to show it. Adrian pulled her close, his arms encircling her waist with practiced tenderness. We're both still learning, I think, how to trust, how to love without fear, how to build something lasting. But we're learning together, and that makes all the difference. As they walked back toward the house, Rosalind felt a profound contentment settle over her. This life, with its quiet country pleasures, its meaningful work, its genuine affection, was worth more than any fantasy of being a duchess. She had what Sebastian could never have given her, a partner who saw her as an equal, who valued her mind as much as her beauty, who wanted her happiness as much as his own. Inside, a fire crackled in the library where they often spent their evenings. Adrian settled into his chair with estate papers, while Rosalind opened her copy of the new poem by Lord Byron, reading aloud passages that struck her fancy. The dogs, two spaniels they'd acquired shortly after arriving at the manor, dozed at their feet. Outside, autumn rain began to fall, pattering against the windows in a soothing rhythm. "Read that last stanza again," Adrian requested, looking up from his work. "The one about freedom." Rosalind found the passage and read, "For there are wanderers o'er eternity, whose bark drives on, and anchored ne'er shall be." But I prefer the earlier lines. "Yet freedom, yet thy banner torn but flying, streams like the thunderstorm against the wind." "That's us," Adrian said softly. "Banner torn but flying. We've both been battered by life, but we're still here, still moving forward." Rosalind closed the book and crossed to his chair, settling onto his lap with familiar ease. "I used to think freedom meant being without constraints, able to do anything I wished. But I've learned that true freedom is choosing your constraints, choosing who you bind yourself to, what commitments you honor, what future you build." "And you choose this?" Adrian asked, though his arms tightened around her as if afraid of her answer. "Choose me this life, even knowing all the challenges we still face?" "Every day," Rosalind replied, touching her forehead to his. "I choose you, Adrian. I choose us. Not because I have to, but because I want to. That's what makes it real." They sat together in the firelight, two people who had found each other in the midst of their separate disasters and built something neither had expected. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the last remnants of summer and preparing the earth for winter's rest and spring's eventual renewal. Rosalind thought about the girl she'd been at 19, so innocent and hopeful, believing that a duke's love would solve all her problems. That girl had needed to die so this woman could emerge, stronger, wiser, capable of real love rather than romantic fantasy. She thought about the future, the child who would arrive in spring, the work with the Education Commission, the continued evolution of her marriage into something deeper and more meaningful. There would be challenges, certainly. Society would never fully forget her past, and there would always be those who whispered behind their fans. But she had learned that dignity wasn't about what others thought. It was about how you carried yourself, how you treated others, and whether you could look at your reflection and be proud of who you saw. "Thank you," Rosalind whispered into the quiet room. "For what?" Adrian asked, his breath warm against her hair. "For seeing me when I was invisible, for offering your name when I was nameless. For teaching me that love isn't about grand gestures or poetic promises. It's about showing up every day and choosing each other over and over again." Adrian's kiss was his answer, tender and full of promise. When they finally went upstairs to their shared bedchamber, no longer separate rooms with a door between, but a suite they occupied together, Rosalind felt gratitude for every twist of fate that had led her to this moment. She had been the Duke's secret shame, society's cautionary tale, a woman ruined and discarded. But she had risen from those ashes to become something more authentic than she'd ever been as that innocent baronet's daughter. She was Lady Rosalind Blackwell, Countess of Thornfield, and she had earned every bit of that title through courage, resilience, and the willingness to risk her heart one more time. As she drifted towards sleep in her husband's arms, with autumn rain drumming on the roof and their child growing beneath her heart, Rosalind allowed herself to believe in happy endings after all. Not the fairy tale kind that young girls dreamed of, but the real kind, earned through suffering, built on honesty and sustained by daily choice. She had bloomed where she was planted, transformed shame into strength, and found that sometimes the paths we never expected to walk lead us exactly where we need to be. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments from which part of the world you're hearing this tale. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more stories with you soon.